My name is Mike. I'm a professor for social management, and you are listening to Managing Around, the podcast about social sciencing and magic managing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Managing Around. In today's episode 10, we will talk about Xenophon and his work on Economicus. So stay tuned. Would you believe me if I told you that in ancient Greece, subjects like household management, economy, agriculture, religion, politics, and education were already addressed by one of the greatest philosophers of all times? That is right. Xenophon addressed these subjects in his renewed work on Economicus. And the best part of it is, he somehow relates all of these aspects in one manuscript, or should I say a masterpiece. There are lots of philosophers who talk about these concepts, but in my opinion, none of them talks about and correlates one of the other as greatly as Xenophon. So, without further hesitation, let's talk about Xenophon's work. Economicus by Xenophon is often treated as one of the earliest sources of economics that we have information about. The book presents us with an introduction to the management of an estate as the smallest economy or economic identity in a society. In this view, a literal translation of Economicus into economics is both misleading and incorrect. Text not only addresses social, political, and intellectual life in classic Athens, but also tells us about the relationship between husbands and wives, principals and servants, masters and slaves, and many other subjects till this day, such as education, religion, and politics. It also includes a discussion about the threefold practical view of society that distinguishes between individuals, the house, and the city-state. Xenophon, who lived 430 to 354 BC, was an ancient Greek philosopher, historian, soldier, and also a student of Socrates. With Plato and Aristophanes, Xenophon is understood as the alternative source for ancient history and Socrates' living and thinking. In the Economicus, Xenophon presents Socrates in a less popular role. In the book, Socrates is not stressing so much about the major Socratic principles of one's own not knowing. Instead, it shows Socrates as a very humble person who learns from and eagerly recognizes the expertise of others. The Economicus is written in form of a multiple nested dialogue, in contrast to Bryson, who wrote treatise about household management. Xenophon wrote a three-layered dialogue with an outer, intermediate, and inner frame. First, let's talk about the outer frame. The outer frame of the dialogue is created by a somewhat informal conversation between Socrates and Critobulus, the son of Crito, who wants to learn from Socrates how to best run a house or estate. Socrates then decides to discuss with him the meaning of wealth and shows the paradoxical disparity between the two. In one of the many remarkable passages in the book, Socrates tells Critobulus that a man should not strive for getting rich, because wealth is in Socratic terms not so much related to possessions and money, but to well-being and fulfilling a higher purpose in life, the so-called Socratic inversion. Which people, in this sense, should sacrifice more to their gods and be charitable to others. Contrary, being poor means someone is more self-sufficient and independent. In other words, all assets from an estate are only useful if they are used diligently and wisely. Secondly, since Socrates does not know much about running a household or choose to ignore the subject, the conversation between Socrates and Critobulus suddenly interrupts. An intermediate dialogue with another person starts. By doing that, Socrates recalls a conversation he recently had with Ichomachus, who, in Socrates' words, is described as a virtuous man. Xenophon then uses the words of Ichomachus as a mouthpiece for his own, or Socrates, advice about how to run a house. More specifically, the main theme of this conversation is on agriculture, as Ichomachus openly talks about his planting knowledge. Moreover, the conversation between Socrates and Ichomachus also includes an educational element, as Socrates wants to teach Ichomachus the proper view on ethics and virtues. And finally, there's a third inner part of a dialogue as part of the discussion between Ichomachus and Socrates. In the conversation about how to run the house, Ichomachus refers to a dialogue between him and his wife. The dialogue describes the methods to be used to educate his wife in the role of running a house as a self-directed partner, the practice of ruling and training the slaves, and farming techniques. So far, we have talked about the masterpiece itself, but what does this work teach us about management? Economicus is a classical masterpiece of Xenophon, and although it is mainly based on ancient Greece, some concepts introduced in the book can still be applied till this day. What we as managers, readers or learners need to understand better is that there is not only one way to do things. And the more we find out about different techniques, subjects and processes, we can then find a style that best suits our personality. Xenophon's book is awesome if you, like me, prefer to take a more simplistic approach to all subjects discussed in the book, or if you are looking for a nice alternative book to read and drift your mind away from all chaos that's going on in the world right now. Let's come to the end of this podcast. Alright, that's it for today, dear listeners. I truly appreciate all your efforts to tune in my podcast for this episode. Please, if you liked this episode, don't forget subscribing to the podcast channel in your favorite podcast app so that you can stay up to date whenever we release a brand new episode on Managing Around. Stay safe, and I will see you on the next episode.
If you liked this episode, please leave a review on the Apple's podcast website. If you are not using an iPhone, there's a link in the show notes. If you've got any ideas or thoughts on this episode, or if you've got an idea about new podcast topics or questions you'd like to discuss, send an audio file or voice note to hi@profmanagement.de. For any non-audio comments, drop a tweet or a DM to @profmanagement on Twitter, please. Thank you for listening and see you next time.